Welcome to the Mets pod. The Mets have clinched a winning record in June for the first time since 2012. On today's show, we're going to get into the rotation as Max Scherzer makes his way back and talk about some trade targets. Joe and I are each going to get 3 All-Star votes for the Mets. Which 6 will we pick? You'll have to stay tuned to find out. We're going to take a look around the division, talk a little Francisco Lindor, and as always, we're going to close out the show answering your mailbag questions. So a reminder to subscribe to the Mets pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Mets pod. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And Joe, let's waste no time. The Mets, the June swoon everybody was scared of. The Mets have clinched a winning record in the month of June. You heard it in the beginning, for the first time since 2012. And the best part is, some help is on the way as Max Scherzer is set to make one more rehab start and then make his way back to the big league club if everything goes well. So, Joe, let's bring in, we got a loaded show today. We're going to talk about how this team can get better. We're going to talk about the division. There is a lot to break down here. So, what's on your mind to kick things off?
So I will be at Max Scherzer's start tonight in Hartford, and I'm excited to see because it sounds like he's going to be throwing to Francisco Alvarez. The last time he started for AA Binghamton, James McCann was also on rehab, so it was a better fit for him to throw to McCann, and Alvarez DH'd and hit a bomb during that game too. But I think it'll be a very interesting dynamic tonight. Max is Max. I mean, I'm scared of him. You're scared of him.
Jeremy Hefner admitted he's scared of him.
Yeah, Jeremy Hefner's slightly scared of him. So now we have a 20-year-old catcher ready to catch him. And, Max is not going to treat the rehab start any different than a major league start. He is 100 miles an hour no matter what. That's just his personality. I mean, you saw the clips last week that he was doing like his pregame shakes in the dugout before a minor league rehab start. So Alvarez is going to have his hands full, but it's going to be a very fun test, I think, to just see that potential future connection. I don't think Alvarez is necessarily a this year guy. We've talked about that. Could be, but I don't think so. But Scherzer's under contract for 3 years, so Alvarez is certainly going to be up before too long.
Without a doubt, at a minimum, spring training next year, he is going to have a lot of experience. So getting some of that now is only helpful for Francisco Alvarez, who, Joe, I know you've interviewed him from Mets perspective before. I know we've read a ton about him. It seems like on the field and off the field, that is a guy that doesn't lack any confidence as well. So this is an interesting dynamic between the two. But, Joe, what do you think something as simple as a one-off rehab start can do, not for Scherzer, who we are excited to see back in this rotation in the big league club, but for a guy like Alvarez that realistically is going to be a part of this franchise's core in the very soon future?
He's not lacking confidence, like you said. I mean, when we had him on Mets perspective, he was like, I'm ready for the major leagues now. If Tatis and Soto were up at 19 or 20, why can't I? He wanted to win 4 World Series. Like, confidence is not lacking.
He's producing.
And he's producing. But I think it will add an extra layer of confidence to know that he caught a big league starter. And not just a big league starter, one of the best big league starters, and one maybe the most difficult guys to catch from just the perspective of how he goes about his everything he does on the mound. So I think that is probably the biggest thing for him, is to have that confidence that, I can catch a big league guy and a frontline big league guy. And maybe that's kind of the last thing on his mind that he needs to, mentally feel he's fully ready.
So on the show, we've hinted in the past about getting pitching help. And I think the more recent conversations around that were more of a guy that's a 6 starter, right? He can be the swing man between giving you a start for 5 innings when you need, being the long man out of the bullpen. We like to call it the Rich Hills of this situation. Rich Hill is the best example we can give, the most recent example we can give. Because I think, Joe, a lot of that conversation was around the fact that there was an assumption that Tylor McGill would be back and ready to go. And obviously McGill, not a setback, but an injury that, another injury, the second time he has to go on the IL, now transferred to the 60-day. it's going to be a long time before we see Tyler McGill again. I'm kind of curious how his usage will be when he's back, where you even want to thrust him into a starting role again when you're in that kind of pennant race. But the most important takeaway here is, Joe, this is a team that is going to be exploring starting pitching at the deadline. And maybe it's just doing their due diligence, but they're going to explore some big names. So I wanted to talk about some of the names around the deadline that the Mets will be calling on, because we know Scherzer is going to be back, right? Carrasco, big bounce back. Taijuan Walker, big bounce back. We know what Bassett can bring. To be fair to David Peterson, he has absolutely held his own, but we need to call it like it is with DeGrom. He's a bit of a wild card right now. So let's just kick things off, Joe. The two big names at the top are Luis Castillo and Frankie Montas. Do you think both these guys are guaranteed to be moved, and do you think that's the kind of headliner that the Mets need to be exploring right now?
I very much go back and forth on this.
Me too.
I said last week the idea of going all in, not something that I think they have to do, but I think it would be pretty foolish to not consider names like this. I mean, you're talking about if you get Jacob deGrom back and he's Jacob deGrom with Max Scherzer, Bassett, would you feel in a true playoff series, like a 7-game playoff series, you kind of want a fourth guy in there? And Carrasco's pitched pretty well this year. Taijuan Walker's pitched well, and you mentioned David Peterson. But you kind of want another guy that you feel like if he starts a playoff game, you're going to win that playoff game. So if you could pursue someone like a Castillo or a Montas, I think those are the top of the market. I think it's a very intriguing possibility. I don't know if they're locks to be moved. They both are under contractual control beyond this year. If they were rentals, then I would feel like they're definitely going somewhere. I would say it's probably maybe 50-50, 60-40 that they get moved. It sounds like Oakland might be a little more motivated to move Montas than Cincinnati might be with Castillo, because Castillo's not having, his typical all-star type season. He's pitching well, but not quite as dominant as he had been in the past, while Frankie Montas has been fantastic. So my expectation is one or both have, a 50% or slightly better chance of being moved.
Do you think part of that goes into play, too? You kind of hinted at it there. We've called this a mini window for the Mets. It's not that in 2 years the window will close and the Mets have no shot at a World Series. It's the way the team is constructed. While their farm system is a little thin at the top for big league help, it's a very, single A, double A specific farm system right now, and they have a huge draft coming up that's going to restock things as well. This 2-year window was a big money spending. Max Scherzer to pair with Jacob deGrom, trading for Chris Bassett, right? Looking at how Carlos Carrasco and Taijuan Walker's contracts are structured. Eduardo Escobar and Mark Canha, both on 2-year deals. You and I have talked about this for a long time, Joe. This is a 2-year mini window. Do you think that eases the pain a little bit that a lot of these guys mention? And it's not just Castillo and Montas, who are obviously two guys that fit the bill of what you said. When they're starting a game, you believe you're going to win the game. But, even a Tyler Mahle, someone like that, right? That they're under control where, yes, you're trading for them. Yes, you're trying to win a World Series this year. But you're also giving yourself a little insurance for next year if you don't bring back a Bassett. If you lose Taijuan Walker to an opt-out or a player like that, do you think that makes it a little easier to swallow sending Mauricio? Maybe the highest guy that seems not expendable, but the one that you can see them actually moving, because Alvarez isn't going anywhere and Beatty's not going anywhere either.
I actually think that's a great point. I think the idea of the extra control is huge for this team, because you mentioned Bassett. There's the mutual option, which might as well be a player option. You have to imagine.
It's insurance.
It's insurance for himself. So odds are he will become a free agent. Taijuan Walker's player option is for like $7 or $8 million. He's I imagine he will go to free agency because he should be able to get more than that. The Mets will likely pick up Carrasco's option at about $14 million, just over. I would imagine they'd keep him just simply because they don't have guys. And then, of course, Jacob deGrom. He's been open. He's opting out, and the Mets are going to have a decision there. Do they want to invest $80+ million per year in Max Scherzer and Jacob deGrom? Because that's what it's going to cost. And if you're able to acquire a guy with contractual control, that takes one of those guys off the list. Where if Taijuan Walker goes, you can replace him with the guy that you trade for. If Chris Bassett leaves, or I mean, we can't rule out the idea of Jacob deGrom leaving, because I do find it peculiar how adamant he is about the opt-out. And what's that stem from? Is it purely just, I want to make as much money as Max Scherzer? Or is it something deeper? Yeah, obviously,
well, we know he hates his contract.
Yeah, we know that, but we don't know if it's even a little deeper than that. So it'll be interesting to see how that free agent class works out, which the Mets have a ton when you go to the offensive side of the ball. Basically, the whole bullpen is free agents, so there's going to be a crazy offseason to come. So if you're able to kind of check off one of those boxes at the deadline with a starter with control, I think that would be helpful. And if you talk about the prospects at the top, I would agree with you. Even as the resident prospect hugger here, if one of the big ones had to go, Mauricio would probably be the one I'd be most willing to deal. As of yet, he's yet to come off shortstop. I know he took some reps in the outfield and second base in spring training, but he hasn't played those in the minor league season this year. Whereas a guy like Vientos has a kind of a clear path to maybe being the designated hitter, and then obviously Alvarez behind the plate and Beatty at third base.
Before we close the book on the trade talk, and we're going to move to some all-star conversation here, is there a name, Joe? Because the national media has done this for the last 2 years, the Castillo conversation for all contenders in baseball. We've talked about Montas a lot because obviously Oakland has made it pretty clear that they are willing and able to sell every single valuable piece that they have on that roster. The Mets already know that from landing a guy like Bassett. But is there a guy on this list, or not list, but is there a guy in your mind? I brought up Mailbag earlier. Is there somebody that you look at and go, hey, maybe that won't cost you a Mauricio caliber prospect, but it can be the number 3, number 4 pitcher you need where you're waiting for their top guys to really get healthy?
I think Tyler Mahle's a very interesting one. He's a guy that his stuff is very good. So I wonder if you can position him with Jeremy Hefner, who obviously we've seen the work that he's done with Peterson, with Tyler McGill, and with others. I think Mailbag has some untapped potential. He misses a lot of bats. He can get up to the mid-90s. He's got a good breaking ball.
That team stinks, too. Just calling it like I see. He gets no help.
The Reds are not a good team, but they'd be one team where I'd be curious if the Mets could flex some of that Steve Cohen financial muscle, and maybe you take on a Mike Moustakas. Take on a bad money from a Mike Moustakas, who he's under control beyond this year. Hasn't really been that good, but you take that on, are you able to lessen the prospect capital that it takes to get a Castillo or a Mailbag if you were to go down that road?
Man, what a full turn that would be from Moustakas yelling in the dugout at the Mets in the World Series in 2015 to potentially being part of the run. And like you said, he's really, really struggled. Not much power in that bat recently, but at the end of the day, the Mets right now, they need some upgrades on the bench, and Moustakas, once again, it's taking on bad money. So when you look at it,
and he has a little positional flexibility too.
He's played a lot of spots.
So he's played a few spots, and in theory, there's power in the bat. So, I mean, if you have the money and they're about to blow past the Steve Cohen tax with basically any trade they make, what's the point in going $1 million over when you could go $10 million over?
$20 million over?
Yeah, whatever. Right. It's not my money.
Don't get me going on the Bumgarner conversation then as well. We'll save that one for another day. All right, so the All-Star voting is up. Obviously, the Mets going to be in the thick of this conversation with the Mets are a more balanced lineup. It's kind of funny when you look at them. They're not a team that's going to have like 4 players just run away with the voting. But you and I want to do a fun exercise where we each get 3 votes. We're going to ping pong draft this thing. So 6 total players have to get mentioned. We're doing this because I think we know who the number 1 guy is going to be. I think we know who the number 2 guy is going to be. Joe, I will leave it up to you. Do you want that first overall selection, or do you want to pick second?
Are we going snake?
No, we are not going snake. Just back and forth.
Then just for my own safety and just so I don't get mad at you, I will go number 1, and I will select the second best closer in baseball.
Okay, you totally went off the rails of what I assumed was going to be number 1, but it doesn't matter.
Edwin Diaz, to me, should be the biggest lock all-star on the team, and the guy that you picked too, just as much of a lock. But Edwin's been fantastic. I mean, he's everything that the Mets thought they were getting. It's just a couple years later. The only closer in baseball that I think I would take over him is Josh Hader, who simply doesn't give up runs. but Diaz misses bats at a better rate than anyone in baseball. And right now, everything is working. He's not even missing too much with his slider. He's not losing control for whole outings. Like, it'll be a couple pitches that'll get away from him, but he's been more consistent with his control. And yeah, he's been straight up dominant. So for me, I'm taking Edwin Diaz number one, and I wanted to make sure you couldn't do that.
No, you deserve that one. And listen, we're working together here. We're gonna support each other's picks, I think, because it's the Mets, right? It's no one else. When you look at Diaz, Joe, the number that stands out to me most recently is that 2019 season where he was Mets fans, number one public enemy at that point, was that he was giving up 2.3 home runs over 9 innings. That number this year is now under 1. It's 0.9. So Diaz is just a totally different player in terms of giving up the home run. He's striking out over 17 batters per 9 innings. It's obviously the 2.12 ERA and the fact that he is closing the door on ball games matters. So I have no argument with you there, but I am going to go with the guy that I thought would have been number one, and it doesn't matter because we think both Diaz and this player are going to be at the All-Star game no matter what. It's Pete Alonso. I mean, what is there to say about this guy? And obviously, we praise Pete on almost every episode we do of this show, and that is justified. When you look at him, a 927 OPS, as we are recording this today, he already has 22 home runs, 69 RBIs. For a lot of guys, that is a good season. Pete has done that before July 1st, 69 RBIs. He's even stolen 2 bases. Pete is out there just athleting. But man, he is everything you want in the middle of a lineup as a slugger. He's been clutch. He's taken his walks to 360 OBP. And you know what? I'll be the first to raise my hand and say I might have overreacted a little bit. He's been rock solid at first base. There's always the moments where you go, man, that was a tough one. Pete has played a consistent first base as well, but he is the guy in the middle of the order that pitchers fear, that teams fear, and the guys in front of him are getting on base, and he's knocking them in over and over again. So Pete Alonso, we'll see if he defends his home run derby title for the 3rd time. I personally don't think he needs to, but we know Petey's a competitive guy. He probably will. Most importantly, he is an all-star, and that will be for the first time since 2019 for Pete.
And quickly on the defensive side of the ball, because obviously we could talk about the homers Pete mashes, his clutch factor, his ability to drive in runs, obviously, like you said, 69 RBIs so far. But on the defensive side, it's just throwing here and there. It's just every so often, the throwing's a little bit off. He's fielding everything well. I mean, if a ball's thrown in the dirt to first base, Pete's picking every single time. Yeah, he's one of the best at picking balls. So Pete's made some stark improvements in his all-around game, and we've talked about him on previous episodes that he's really coming into his prime, and I think you're going to be maximizing everything that Pete Alonso is. So with my second pick, I'm going to go with who we've called the best pure hitter on the Mets. And with the injury to Ozzie Albies, he's moving up the voting charts there at second base, and that's Jeff McNeil. And I think we've talked about this in the spring, and then obviously throughout the early going. Is Jeff McNeil back? The Jeff McNeil that hit over 300 with a 380 plus on base percentage for the first 2.5 years of his career before last year having the injuries, kind of trying for power when he was healthy and kind of bringing all those stats down. Well, I think the answer is kind of a flat out yes. Jeff McNeil is back. He only has 4 home runs, which is fine. If he hits 10 to 12, that's plenty for me. Batting average back up over 320, almost at 330 at 327. On base percentage over 380 at 386. He's playing really good second base, also playing really good left field when they throw him out there. So to me, Jeff McNeil is not far off from the Diaz and Alonso group that should be all-stars. He's probably, behind Jazz Chisholm of the Marlins, who's having a fantastic year. But I think McNeil has earned the right to make it out to LA for the All-Star game this year.
Man, I'm with you all the way. I mean, the McNeil bounce back has quietly been one of the biggest catalysts of this entire Mets season. The consistency, the ability to beat the shift at will. It is just startling the way McNeil can do that, the way he has gone back to the approach of a guy that's looking to be the starter, just get on base and let everybody else drive him in rather than always trying to hit the home run. So for me with McNeil, I mean that you can make the argument, I think, very close to Diaz and Alonso. McNeil's right up there in that tier of how much he deserves to be at the All-Star game. All right, so the next guy for me, this is where it starts to turn, right? We knew that Diaz, we knew that Pete, we knew that McNeil would be mentioned on this show. That's why we didn't just do 3 votes, you and I working together. We did 3 each, because these are the guys that you're going to have to stand on the table and argue a little bit more for. So I'm going to go with Brandon Nimmo here, which I know might shock to hear that come out of my mouth here, Joe. But Nimmo, I mean, when you look at it, it's kind of funny in a way that when you look at his on base right now, he's actually underachieving to the player that he typically is, but he is driving the ball this year. He is somebody that I think will get back to his norm of being a 400 kind of on base guy, not that 360-ish kind of guy, but 5 triples. His career high in 2008 was in 2018 with 8, so he's probably going to shatter that this year. He does have 5 home runs. You know, he is the guy at the top of the lineup, so the 24 RBIs is no surprise there. He doesn't get a lot of opportunities to drive runs in. He has scored 42 runs. Keith always says it. You'd love to see him, because of the athlete he is, be able to steal a bag every now and then, but we're going to have to wait for that. Plays a good center field. When you look at Nimmo, he is undoubtedly one of the better center fielders in the National League, or should I say, more complete center fielders in the National League. Defensively, he's turned into a plus player. The kind of catalyst he is at the top of the lineup of the team with the most wins in the National League is really, really important piece of the puzzle to me. He's right around an 800 OPS. And once again, being a guy that's not just hitting singles or walking, but being a guy that can get doubles and triples now and the occasional home run, puts Nimmo in this conversation.
Nimmo's grown from a batter that's trying to draw a walk to an aggressive hitter that's willing to take a walk.
Yes.
And his knowledge of the strike zone is almost unmatched in baseball. Juan Soto is probably one exception, but outside of that, he's probably as good as there is in all of baseball with that. And on the defensive side of the ball, huge growth in center field. And one thing that I say a lot, and I'm sure you say a lot in your football coverage, like, you can't really make somebody faster.
Yeah.
Well, Brandon Nimmo has sort of defied logic. If you go and you look at his Baseball Savant page and you go back over the last 3 years, he has actually increased his sprint speed each of the last couple years. So I don't know how he's did it. I don't know what training he's
healthy,
doing.
Joe.
Yeah, I guess that is a factor. He is
You're
healthy,
right, though.
but
You're right, though. It's
Yeah,
different. I think it's confidence
yeah.
when it comes to center field. The bases, I can't figure that out.
yeah, he's faster, and like Keith mentions, we don't know why he doesn't steal bases, but he doesn't steal bases. But the combination of an increased speed, sprint speed, with the great positioning that the Mets do, they put him in the right spot where he's able to most easily get the balls back, forward, left, right. He's proven out that he was the right guy to put in center field even after signing Starling Marte, which, speaking of Starling Marte, that's going to be my 3rd pick. He is actually surging up the All-Star voting. I believe he's 4th amongst outfielders, and that voting's closing this week. And he's not having the true full-on Starling Marte season. It's actually kind of a little different from his career norm. His average is down a little bit. He's just batting just under 280, and he's a career 290 hitter. The on-base percentage is slightly below career norms. The power is up, and the stolen bases are down, which I find pretty interesting considering his recent success of stealing 47 bases last year, and he's kind of been consistently a guy in the 20s and 30s. He only has 8 so far, but he's dealt with a couple injuries as well. So I like to think as we continue forward, he's going to get closer to the Starling Marte that he's been for his whole career. And you've seen glimpses of it. He's gone through stretches where he's absolutely raking. And I mean, despite kind of being a quote-unquote down year for him, he still has a 117 OPS plus, so he's 17% above league average as a hitter. And, I think that warrants, especially with a lot of injuries and some underperformance in the outfield throughout baseball. Like you said, it's going to get a little complicated, a little contentious perhaps. I think Starling Marte has earned at least consideration for the All-Star game.
I don't think you're crazy at all. I think that would have been my next pick as well. You kind of get into this tricky part right now, right, where you look at it and so you took Marte, who you kind of highlighted, hasn't been himself, but has still been a pretty important piece on this team. The way he can run, the leadership, the defense he brings to the outfield, and the fact that, he's still hitting almost 280, which is the ability to make contact has been a difference maker. All right, so the final pick here, and this is undoubtedly the toughest one because there's a lot of different directions you can go in this spot. I'll say the three guys that I was down to here, Joe, and I'll finish with the one that I'm going to pick. Taijuan Walker, who is hovering right at a 3-flat ERA, who made the All-Star team last year, and with a couple really good starts to finish out the first half of the season, he'll be in the conversation, at least for Taijuan Walker. The difference with him is he started 12 games where a guy like Bassett that's pitched the full season, he's missed 3 starts here or so, we're saying with Taijuan, and that could probably cost him the difference of being on the outside looking in. This guy won't make it because he doesn't get saves, but he's been one of the best relievers, I think, in the entire National League. The only player with a lower ERA on the team as a full-time player than Diaz, that's Drew Smith. He doesn't get saves. Drew Smith's not going to be on the All-Star team. He has a sub-2 ERA. He's striking out over 10 batters per 9 innings. I don't know where this Mets bullpen would be without Drew Smith right now, but you traditionally need to be a closer to fit in on that All-Star team. My last one here is going to be Francisco Lindor. And once again, Lindor needs to get through one of his hot streaks again to even be in this conversation. Lindor is just like this the entire season. It's up and down. He'll hit home runs in multiple games, then he'll kind of disappear. So Lindor is the kind of guy right now hovering around a 250 batting average. He needs to get back up to an 800 OPS. He needs to hit a couple big-time home runs in the month of July. He needs to steal a couple more bases. We know the kind of glove he is at shortstop. I think another thing is, Joe, no Tatis this first half of the season. So the door at shortstop might be a little bit more open than it traditionally is. Mind you, this is our 6th pick here, so this isn't somebody that we think is going to make the All-Star team. But I think out of all of the guys left, he realistically has the best argument. Who would you have gone with in this spot?
I interestingly would have went Francisco Lindor as well, and I thought that was just going to be crazy.
The no-brainer?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
No, I thought it was going to be considered kind of crazy because, like you said, he's been so up and down. The ups have been great, the downs have been frustrating, and maybe I'm slightly affected and impacted by like Twitter and the voices around Francisco Lindor's performance. So I think I would have went Lindor. He's playing a fantastic shortstop. He had a bit of throwing issues here and there, but the range is great. He's playing him and Guillermo turning double plays is like it's one of the most beautiful things to watch, and love baseball, right? That is what you love to see in baseball. But Lindor, like you said, if he hits one of those hot streaks here in the next couple weeks, I think he'll cement himself as, a true all-star caliber shortstop, which is, let's call it what it is, what the Mets are paying for.
Yeah, and I left out the most important thing with Lindor. He has 56 RBIs. That's top 5 in the National League. If you're looking for categories of him, top 5 in the National League, not top 5 at shortstops. He's a producer. So, all right.
While he's been inconsistent. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
I think
while he's been in
for one of those hot streaks before the break.
And while he's been inconsistent, he's been so consistent when runners got on and runners in scoring position. It seems like every time he comes up in those spots, he comes through. So I don't know if that's a specific skill or not, but if it is, he has it.
All right, and we'll get into Lindor a little bit later, but before we do that, let's take a look around the division. We often do this during the show because since it's gotten interesting. For a while, the division was not interesting at all. The Braves had their surge. They're actually playing 500 baseball in their last 10 games, so they had that streak where they literally didn't lose for like 12 games. Now they've, because the schedule got harder for them, and they started to lose some games. The Mets are 6-4 in their last 10. The Braves are 5-5 in their last 10, so the Mets still hold a 5-game division lead. Then you have the Phillies that are quietly 8 games back. They're 39-35. I think a lot of people don't realize that with the Phillies with their cold start. So they're still hovering around, as we like to say. And then the Marlins, young team, struggling. Mets fans have seen that firsthand with how the Mets have taken care of business for the most part against them. The Nationals, one of the worst teams in baseball and clearly in rebuilding mode. They are going to be selling a lot of pieces at the deadline and somehow only getting worse. So let's cue in on the Braves here, Joe. They're obviously a legitimate threat to the Mets. I wouldn't say a panic threat to the Mets, where the Mets have tread water without DeGrom, without Scherzer, now without McNeil. The Braves have lost Ozzie Albies for at least till mid-August. Right now, do you think this has become a legitimate race that you have some fear of? Or do you think things kind of trend in the way of the Mets, where they do have one of the easiest schedules in September, they do have reinforcements on the way, and while the Braves were aggressive at the deadline last year and it paid off for them, we know the Mets are not just going to sit on the phone and do nothing at this deadline either.
I don't really have that Chicken Little mindset where I'm sitting here and looking
Oh
backwards
no, yeah.
and looking down out of fear of what's behind me. And for the Mets, the Braves are behind them, and the Mets are a very good team in their own right. The Braves are a very good team. They won the World Series last year. I mean, I said this when we did our live show. Like, you were probably pretty naive if you thought the Mets were just gonna run through the NL East and wrap this division up early. This is going to be a race down through September. Atlanta and the Mets still have 15 games left against each other, so I think that's going to be a large determining factor in who wins it. But Atlanta is a strong roster. I mean, they have some pitching. Their offense, when it's on, can really go. They have good relievers in the back end. I know Kenley Jansen just went on the IL, but when he's okay, you have him and Will Smith. They're a very good team, and the Mets and the Braves will probably be battling for the remainder of the summer. It's going to stay pretty close, but I can't have the mindset of fear or looking back. I mean, the Mets have the best record in the National League. Like, let us not forget that. And it's going to be July 1st here in this week. So odds are they're probably still going to have the best record in the National League when you enter July. So the Mets shouldn't be looking backwards, looking down. They should be looking ahead at what's coming back. Max Scherzer, Trevor May at some point, Jacob deGrom probably at some point. And like you said, they're going to be active at the trade deadline here in the next month. There's no reason to be in fear. Let's enjoy the season for what it is, and it's just going to be a race, and that's baseball.
Yeah, it was never going to be easy. And keep in mind that the Mets have the biggest lead in the National League in their division. The Brewers only have a half-game lead over the Cardinals. The Dodgers only have a game-and-a-half lead over the Padres. So the Mets actually have the biggest gap out of anybody. But like you said, Joe, what it's going to come down to is the Mets games against the Braves, and there are a lot of those left. And that's going to start very soon in July, a series that we will dive pretty deep into. All right, a reminder, you're listening to the Mets Pod. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So we touched on this a moment ago. I want to talk a little bit about Francisco Lindor before we get into the mailbag. You and I think for the most part, are Lindor, I wouldn't say stands. We're more optimistic about Lindor. We have been pretty vocal that he, justifiably so, gets scrutinized the way he does because of the contract attached to him. When you just evaluate the player in a vacuum, he's obviously one of the best shortstops in the National League, one of the most impactful for the way he drives the ball, drives in runs, hits home runs, can steal bases and play defense. Is this just the player that he is, Joe, that he gets sizzling hot and then cools off for a while, where these screams start again, where everybody's mad, and then he gets sizzling hot and silences them again? Or do you think there could be, the finger injury maybe lingering from the hotel that he never went on the IL with? Do you think there's, last year we knew he was settling in, and he has absolutely settled in a little bit more this year. But is there anything to Lindor's streakiness, or is he just that kind of player?
I think it's probably a combination of everything you just said. I mean, if he truly did fracture the tip of his finger, that, even if you're playing through it or whatever, either way, that's going to take some time to feel better. Like, you don't just fracture your finger, not go on the IL, and act like it didn't happen. So that could be partially a factor. I think he may not be the most consistent player in the world. And if we're being honest, if you look up and down major league lineups, there's very few players that you can name that are consistent at all times. This year Aaron Judge has been consistent, but how many times have you seen Aaron Judge go through stretches where he can't hit the ball and then he'll hit a ton of home runs? So I think consistency is a factor. But a couple things that I notice when I watch him, when he's off, you see him chasing a lot. Not only chasing a lot, you also see his hips flail out, his butt flail out a bit. And that's when he's off balance. He's not fully extending to the ball. He's not getting his weight forward and through the baseball. And that's when you see him kind of hit some lazy fly balls and top the balls over. But then, of course, then when you're chasing, that's when you see the strikeouts too rise. But when he's right, you see him keep that hip and that front shoulder in and really drive through the ball anywhere in the zone. He could pull on a fastball. He could take a fastball that's outside. He could take it the other way. So I think it's somewhat mechanical, but perhaps the overall, I guess, lack of consistency as a player, it could be just a mechanical thing that is inconsistent, and it comes and goes. And It happens to a lot of players in baseball, and I think the microscope's obviously on Lindor because he has a $340 million contract, and that comes with the territory. If you sign a $340 million contract in New York City, the expectations are going to be you need to be consistently a superstar, and maybe it's just one of those things that the expectations he may never quite live up to them, but I think he's still a very, very good player.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if you have a Gold Glove caliber shortstop that hits 25 to 30 home runs, steals 15 to 20 bases, and that team is competing for a World Series, I don't think people will care that much. So we just need to see how it plays out with Lindor. All right, let's get into the mailbag because we got a lot of good questions for today's show. We'll kick things off here from our good pal, longtime listener of the show, Steve Miller, said, what are your thoughts on the Mets being linked to higher-end starting pitchers in the trade market? Do they really need them, or should they plan for health from internal options? Should have enough time to see how healthy they are before the deadline. So the reason I put this one in the show, Joe, is because it brings a different element to how we kick things off, where the Mets do have some time, right? They're going to see Max Scherzer coming back and hopefully staying healthy. They're going to know where Jacob deGrom is at physically before the deadline. But I think the reality here might be that even with the volatility of deGrom, the excitement around Scherzer returning, that the Mets still want that third or fourth guy along with Bassett. And I'm not saying they're going to go get Castillo. I'm not going to go say they're going to get Montes. But if those prices come down, that might be something that they explore.
I think the timing is interesting, right? Like, I think this is maybe more of a 2 or 3 week from now conversation as those guys come back. Like, does Max make it through to start clean tonight and come back, later this week or this weekend? Does Jacob deGrom come back in the month of July? I think that is a big question. Does anything else happen over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Taijuan Walker has been hurt throughout his career. Carlos Carrasco came out of his last start with lower back tightness. He's obviously making this start, so it seems like he's okay. But does something flare up? Could something happen to a Chris Bassett? Like, there's other things that could happen. Like, while we're getting closer and closer to the trade deadline, it's just over a month away now. A month is also a very long time, and a lot of things can happen. So they could look to kind of build that quote-unquote super rotation for the playoffs if everything goes great. But it also, there's some volatility with deGrom and other guys in this rotation that maybe it ends up actually in need if we talk again in 3 weeks.
And one point I'll say to Steve's question is that, as he asks, the Mets are being linked to the higher-end starting pitchers, right? We've said this before. Mets fans need to get used to the Mets being linked to every big player acquisition across baseball as long as Steve Cohen is the owner of this team. Because the bottom line is, yes, the Mets are going to be in on big moves. The Mets are going to be aggressive. The Mets are going to spend money. They're going to make big trades. They're going to do everything they can to win. On the flip side, if you are the Reds, if you are the A's, I don't care who, if you are a team that has a valuable pitcher to trade, you need the Mets in the conversation, because guess who else is in the conversation? The Braves, the Phillies, the Dodgers, the Giants. You need the Mets in there as well. It's called leverage. So I'm not saying the Mets won't go get Castillo. I'm not saying the Mets won't make a call for Frankie Montes. But I think at the end of the day, as Mets fans entering a new era, that's something that we all need to be accustomed to, is that the Mets are going to be involved in every single big player acquisition, whether it's real or whether it's not.
That's a great point, and we'll be hitting that a lot in the offseason too. When free agency comes around, every big free agent you're going to hear the Mets linked to, and that could be from the agent side. It could be valid, because Steve Cohen is going to spend money, but the same goes for a trade market. So I think that's a great way to look at it. Is right now, the Mets are the team that everyone's talking about because of Steve Cohen, because of their success. And it'd be kind of foolish for teams to not say, oh, yeah, we talked to the Mets, even if they didn't.
Absolutely. All right, the next question is from Return of the Mac, who asked, can we just talk about how important Buck seems to be? The double challenge, teaching the team the little rules, like sliding before second, or even his hit-by-pitch death stares. I love this question being sent because we didn't have a segment on Buck on today's show. The double challenge was something that I didn't even know you could do in baseball, to be quite honest. I'll say this, Joe. I have learned more about the baseball rule book in 3 months of watching the Mets under Buck Showalter than I have seen in the last decade.
Buck is I love Buck now. Like, I remember you and I talking in the offseason, and I had my questions. He has answered said questions. I mean, he's adaptable, but like you said, the double challenge, didn't know it was a thing. The pickoff thing from a month ago with JD Davis. No, the tag up, not the pickoff. The thing where the runner was tagging up and JD Davis went. I didn't know like that was a thing.
Neither did I.
Like, he's definitely teaching us a lot about baseball, and it's clear that the team loves him. I mean, when they won the game the other day, you saw them trying to rip his jacket off like Pete rips the jersey off on walk-offs, and the feisty old man that Buck Showalter is swatting them away. He's the man. Like, he handles the media great. He could be funny, but serious when he has to be.
Deflects questions when he wants.
Yeah. He knows what he's doing. There's no question. And, I think we've spoken about over time, like, what's the value of an experienced manager? Maybe it's just because the Mets haven't had an experienced manager in so long that we forgot what the value is, because clearly Buck has been a major, major plus for his team and not just a guy filling out a lineup card.
I think that, and I think the most important thing we haven't seen, for the most part as well, is that nobody has spiraled out of control. We've seen Bassett hit a rough patch. We've seen Lindor get hot and cold. We've seen these guys go through classic streaks that happen in baseball. And I think under Buck's leadership, nobody has, spun out of control and just had a first half that you look at and go, man, what a disaster. Is this guy ever going to be the same again? I think when you have that kind of veteran leadership, it goes a long way to keep everything even-keeled, never too high, never too low. It is a long, long season, and we're going to be here for all of it. So, Joe, closing thoughts as the Mets wrap up a rare winning June and hopefully take that into a winning July before the break.
Let's not move the goalposts any further. Let's just call it what it is. The Mets are a good team. April and May were too early. The June swoon was coming. Didn't happen. Don't worry about September collapses from 18 years ago. Not relevant anymore. I understand. They affected me too. But let's take a chance to try to enjoy this summer of really good Mets baseball. And I can't wait tonight to head up to Hartford. I'm going to see Alvarez in person. I'm going to see Beatty in person, Mauricio, and I'll get the chance to see this prospect, Max Scherzer. Haven't seen him before in the minors.
Yeah, all I know about him is that he does not want to be a rumble pony. So good luck out there, Joe. And a reminder to everyone to subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, every single week on Twitter, Joe and I want your mailbag questions to include in the show. We've been having a lot of fun with that. So thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.